What if you could awaken your understanding to levels you could never imagine? I'd like to welcome back Tina Erwin. She is a published author of multiple books, as well as a former US Naval Commander. Welcome, Tina.
Thank you so much, Angelina. I'm thrilled to be here.
It is my pleasure to have you back once again. So, you have a number of books that you've published, which you will speak about during this conversation, as well as there will be a link in the show notes. And I think a part of your mission might be to remove the fear, the confusion, and perhaps the bewilderment associated around this idea of psychic abilities. But before we dive into that, I wondered if you might share a bit about your backstory.
My backstory. I'm like a lot of people who wake up and realize they can see and do things. A lot of times this happens when you're a child, but that doesn't mean that you don't. When it happens to you as a child, you don't realize that not everyone can see what you see or do what you do. And you may only have a few little things that start out. But as you reach certain points in your life, more psychic ability comes to the fore, almost as if as your life mission unfolds, that's what you need at the time. And I spent 20 years in the Navy, and I worked for the submarine force. I never had my own submarine because the law had not changed in the 20 years that I was in the Navy. Women could not serve aboard submarines. However, working in all the peripheral areas, I got to understand how critically important psychic ability is to men and how they used it and how they analyzed situations based on their gut instinct. And in quiet moments, I carpooled with another, when I was a lieutenant, I carpooled with the commander. And he would tell me how he was concerned about his submarine, or he sensed something was going to happen. And he isn't saying, oh, gee, Tina, I have psychic ability. He was talking out loud about a sense that he had he couldn't explain. And I have story after story of submariners who knew something was going to happen, who felt it. They knew it was coming. They didn't know how to stop it. And so understanding that these extremely supposedly left-brain men could feel their psychic ability enabled me to understand that some of these men saved their ships. They actually say one guy saved 125 lives because he had a feeling. One guy was barely able to save his own life. And when you begin to understand that you can't live without having that intuitive sense, can't drive a car without it, then you begin to understand how important it is to acknowledge it, to take the airy-fairy, mysticism out of it and bring it down to scientific reality and then start to apply it in day-to-day life. If you have skill sets that take you to another level, then you have to learn how to use them responsibly. And I learned how to use those skills and abilities over many years. That's sort of my backstory.
Yes, yes. Thank you for speaking into that for context. And I know that there's going to be a set of books that you're going to publish shortly to help individuals who either have a family member with psychic abilities or that they themselves might have psychic abilities to further extend your knowledge and tools and insights, given the path that you have walked in your lifetime. And your books have spoken into many stories of both individuals that you've helped, whether it was career related or just along the path of moving into a house and trying to unpack this idea of predecessor energy. But in this conversation, we're actually going to jump into this idea of a legacy. And historically, a legacy meant, let's say there was a messenger or somebody that worked on behalf of a member of royalty. Whereas these days, anybody can claim personal agency of their holistic legacy. And one of the obstacles that comes up, whether it's a family of wealth or just a middle-class family or even families that you've spoken to around the world, is this idea of what drugs and alcohol can do, or even one might say possession. So we're going to dive into this subject that I think a lot of people have not thought about or they're unsure how to navigate. And I will preface this conversation with a disclaimer that this is not meant to be medical advice or legal advice, etc., but rather a conversation about what you might say is how do you say, the physics of the metaphysics?
Explaining the physics of metaphysics.
Yes, yes. That there's some of this that's just practical, but we've never been taught this unless we've come across a situation where we've either had to learn it, or we have, let's say, a family member, or we're born into having psychic abilities. And I know one of the things you've said is people have psychic abilities of many different levels. So some could be a remote viewer and have very advanced abilities, and others, they might just know that when they're driving the car to press their brakes sooner than when the accident happens. So what happens when alcohol takes over a person or influences their body?
This is a really fantastic topic, and I appreciate the opportunity to share this. Alcoholism can, as one of the terms people use is, oh, it runs in families, drug abuse, alcohol abuse, all of these different things, even suicide, it runs in families. Like, this cancer or this illness runs in families, but it doesn't have to. And a lot of times when you're talking about alcohol and drug abuse, you're talking about generational depression. And that is a horrible legacy to talk about. But if someone doesn't seek to change that, it becomes, again, it continues for I don't know how many thousands of years. When you look at how do people start drinking alcohol, sometimes it starts I know people start drinking at age 8 or 9 because it was available and it was in their house. And they built a tolerance to it.
Or they had older siblings.
Or they had older siblings, or their parents were always drinking. They're saying, we can drink, but you can't. And the do as I say, not as I do is problematic, which is a completely other topic. But let's look at the mechanics of drinking alcohol. Alcohol, whether it's beer, wine, or hard liquors, lowers your frequency for a full 24 hours. It dropped. It's like in Star Trek, we have shields up because we have things coming at us. Our immune system are our shields. Our immune system is also our auric field. And we know this is true because when you're in a crowd and somebody gets in your face, and you really see this we lived in Italy for a long time. And I noticed that many times Italians get really close to you, and Americans are always backing up, not because they don't like the person in front of them, but that they can feel that their auric field is being impacted. And another way to know that this is valid is because if you go to a shopping mall and it's really crowded, all of those auric fields are colliding and bumping into each other, even if you aren't physically touching another person. You come back from the mall and you are wiped slick. You're thinking, God, I didn't do that much. I walked in and out of stores. Why am I so tired? Because you're encountering all the different frequencies in everybody's auric field. It's kind of amazing. Now, if you are drinking alcohol and your auric field, your force field, your immune system has holes in it, because prolonged alcohol abuse create holes in your auric field.
Like Swiss cheese.
It looks just like, if you could remote view that person's etheric structure, it looks like Swiss cheese. You also see this in every kind of abuse. Their force field is just completely, it's just obliterated. It's horrible. Well, what happens is that your immune system keeps you immune on multiple levels, not just from disease, virus, bacteria, the common cold, but from other things you wouldn't have imagined. When a person's auric field is non-existent or filled like, or open like Swiss cheese, a lot of energies can impact that person they can't see. And how do we know this is true? We know this is true because when we go to different places, we can feel, oh my gosh, this is so creepy. I can't stand it. I have to get out of here. That's because your auric field are like these millions of little sensors that are going, danger, 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 get out of here. Or if you go to could be an Asian garden, Japanese, Chinese, could be any beautiful garden. Although sometimes Asian gardens have a particular sense of perfect balance. That's what you feel when you're there. You feel that you are safer there. But when you have no auric field, what happens is, if it's greatly diminished, that sensibility of danger is less. This is also why you see so many women have a lot of problems in nightclubs and raves and bars and college fraternity parties, the office party, somebody slips them, Rohypnol or something else. They're not paying attention or they're drinking and all of their shields are down. Well, if they have a glass of something and they switch to something else and they're eating, they can bring that force field back up. But if they're not eating and they're just drinking and drinking and they don't remember what happened the next morning, you frequently see people who have no memory of what happened when they were drinking. And I've heard this for so many times. They can then be invaded by ghosts who are alcoholics or drug addicts or criminals, frankly. And we know this is true because we hear people say, when they drink, they just become a completely different person. That's because a completely different person walked into their auric field and inside of their body. Oh my gosh, I realize what I just said. So, am I the only one who has observed this? Doctors Raymond Moody and Dr. Bruce Goldberg have written books about this. And they're psychotherapists and they're psychiatrists. And what they have looked at is when you have a person who is a chronic drinker, they call them functioning alcoholics. We've all heard that term. They can have, couldn't believe this, but I did believe it because I have observed this, up to 60 ghosts inside that person's body. And when the person is sober, the ghosts never stop telling that person, we need a drink. You want to drink. You want to drink. You got to drink. When the person says, oh, I don't want to drink anymore, I'm going to go on the wagon. Well, they didn't get rid of the ghosts that are with them. They don't know how to do that. And it's a huge problem. But these are things that absolutely can happen.
Yes,
thank you. Have a question.
Yes, thank you for speaking into that. One of the things that I think is so interesting that is described in many of your books is this idea that when somebody does get their auric shield attacked time and again, it can turn to fine dust, and thus their shield is down. And as you said, it's that much more easy to either have something that's an energy attached to them, or they can even come into this life. And I know this is metaphysical and might be beyond the realm of some individuals' conditioning when they've been brought up. But at the same time, I know that there is I think it's like $3.7 trillion that's about to pass from one generation to the next in the next 5 or 10 years. And yet, if the next generation that's coming up that's going to be given this wealth doesn't have the tools to understand that perhaps they need to be a little bit more careful with and around alcoholism or drugs per se, or they have a family member. And that has been a huge influence regarding their self-esteem in life. Like, let's say there's a founder of a family business, a patriarch or a matriarch, and that individual has been abusive to that member of the next gen, which often is not talked about in the public. It's that people sometimes say, oh, that member of the next gen or the rising gen, they're just so spoiled and entitled. And that could be true. But then there also could be an element of that young individual coming up that has been berated by their parents. And they might not even fathom this idea that that individual's auric field could turn to fine dust. So I know we're speaking deeply into a subject that a lot of times people don't want to unpack. A lot of times attorneys will say, we've written a document and the 4 corners of the document are absolutely perfect. And then what happens is the family starts to fight after that individual passes. Or with many celebrities in Los Angeles on the West Coast, whether it's Tom Petty, there's so many different celebrities, they can escape to another world when it comes to drugs and alcohol. And then you see families fall apart. And yet, if you've got the helm of the leadership being influenced by drugs and alcohol, it's better to get our hands messy for a moment, unpack this subject, because a lot of times attorneys don't know how to unpack this and financial planners don't want to touch this. So we're bringing it up today, Tina, and talking about some of this, what I might call the uncomfortable topics. So let me go back to this word possession. How do you see this word? And would you speak more into it, knowing what you know about the histories of family and genealogy and maybe even epigenetics and some of what you've come across, because you've helped many individuals and families around the world?
That is a very complicated question.
Just going to put you on the spot.
Epigenetics goes back to what I talked about, generational depression. And I've had client after client who have had family members who were beaten and beaten and beaten. If you were beaten the whole time you grew up, you don't have to touch alcohol to have your auric field shredded. If you suffered physical, mental, emotional, sexual, or spiritual abuse, all of those things impact your auric field. And in fact, I have an enormous number of clients who never had children because they were so abused as children. They did not want to promote into the future this history. They didn't want to perpetuate the abuse because they wanted to understand what happened to them and heal themselves. And I feel that's probably a pretty wise path. Well, I'm beating my child because my mom beat me. And I had a sailor who beat his wife. And this isn't about alcohol in this case. He beat his wife. And he was a sailor of the quarter. He was a good guy. Big, big man. And I said, we sent him to anger management and we sent him to the shrink and we sent him to, everything the Navy could do on paper. And finally he comes into my office one day and he says, Commander, what's the big deal? So I beat my wife. Nobody's perfect. And the woman inside of me wanted to leap across my giant desk and strangle him. But the compassionate person in me got a grip. And I looked at him not as an abusive man, but as a little boy. And I said, Petty Officer, whatever his name was, did your daddy beat you? He says, yes, ma'am. He beat me every day, but good. Did your granddaddy beat your daddy? Oh, yes, ma'am. Oh, my gosh, he beat my daddy. My daddy used to talk about how much his daddy beat him. And then there was a silence in the room. And at that moment, this man looked at me and he said, doesn't everybody get beaten when they grow up? And I said, no, it's called assault. No, it doesn't have to happen. And you have the power to change it because for the next 1,000 years, your family legacy will be abusive people. But it's amazing. You have the power in this moment to change that. And you have to decide if you have the strength and the courage to do it. You're not a bad man. You just had a sad childhood. It's what you knew. And I'm trying to teach you that you don't have to continue this way. And he thanked me very much and left. And 2 weeks later, he was transferred. That is the truth. I cannot tell you how his story evolved. It didn't end, it evolved. And I like to think that perhaps in that moment of kindness, instead of judgment, I might have helped him. When you're looking at alcoholism and drug abuse, what you're looking at is this vice-like control by the dead alcoholics. That's why all bars are haunted. People say, oh, I'm going to go to this haunted house. It's like, dude, just walk in any bar. You bring your equipment. You're going to discover there's ghosts everywhere. It's like if you could put on these magic glasses and you could see differently, you would see all these ghosts slipping in and out of people's bodies, getting them to drink and drink and drink. That's why there's so much rape. Women end up, their drinks are, I have had it, somebody tried to do it to me more than one time. I'm 5'1". I mean, I can take, about that much wine. That's it. That's a really cheap date, let me tell you. My point is, it isn't that you're a party pooper or you don't know how to have fun because you're not drinking. You are wiser because you have an understanding of the effect that alcohol has on your entire immune system and auric field. In fact, alcohol feeds cancer faster than almost anything else. Again, it drops your immune system. So when these ghosts go in, some of them can lodge in different parts of your body. I found them in shoulders and legs and hips and around the heart and all different kinds of places. And you're thinking, I can't wrap my brain around what this woman said. How can a ghost be in your shoulder? Well, remember, they're not a physical person. They're energy. And that energy can move in and out of a body, and it's small, but it's still a personality. When you die, you become a small piece of energy that continues. But if you want to keep drinking, you don't cross over, which is why when I wrote the Crossing Over prayer book, I have an entire section on crossing over alcoholics and drug addicts. And I had a woman from India write to me. I didn't even know how she found me. Can you create a prayer that I can say every night to help my husband as he's drinking? And I sat down and asked for a little guidance. And I wrote a prayer of protection for the person, for the family members, and a prayer that the family member could direct at their loved one, their alcoholic loved one. And then finally, a prayer that the alcoholic could say for themselves if they want to change. And the fourth prayer for alcoholics was crossing them over when they die. I did the same thing for drug addicts because it's becoming generational. And of course, lawyers wouldn't know how to handle this. They don't understand that when someone is drunk or they're a functioning alcoholic, they don't really know who they're talking to. And the person can manage through the day. They could be really quite clever at deceiving people. So the question might become, so what can you do about that? That's why I wrote the prayers. But on the other hand, being in judgment of that person, you have to look at what caused them to want to drink, to go into oblivion, to escape in the first place. Was it just bad friends? Can we cast blame in all these other places? Or is it that the traumas of childhood are so great? Some people are able to navigate through that traumatic childhood without becoming alcoholics or drug addicts or abusers. I know many of those people. They're quite courageous. But some people are shattered enough inside that they can't get past it. And some people suffered such hideous abuse, rape at an early age, that parts of their very soul have been shaved off and gone. And the person is a shell. You see people where you think the lights are on, but there's nobody really home. That's entirely possible that's why. So I want to make sure I'm checking in with you, or am I answering your question here?
Yeah, yes, you are. And it's interesting because I know you've mentioned in our prior conversations with podcasting and so forth that an individual can be hanging by a thin thread, and yet somebody from the outside, if they don't have the eyes to see it, will completely bypass it in terms of allowing that person to be truly seen, heard, and understood, which is so interesting because in planning a holistic legacy and designing it, there has to be curiosity to understand the needs underneath and who that person really is. It's got to be more than the legal and financial documents. And I want to play off of something that you said a moment ago. In estate planning, there's something called dead hand control when it comes to wills and so forth. And so it's just interesting. But you are answering my question. And I think about today, even with the opioid crisis, not just in the United States, but globally, and how much fentanyl. and yet it's destroying families, which again is why I wanted you to dive deep into the subject, because you have the courage to speak into it. So let me bring up the principle of how energy is neither created or destroyed. So energy is neither created nor destroyed. Is there anything else you would like to say about possession that somebody might be blind to?
Person who has died, this is why one of my biggest missions is to teach anyone who wants to know how to cross over a dead person. Could be a relative, could be a stranger, it's irrelevant. And they don't have to give you permission. You have the right to cross them over immediately. I'm bringing this up because when an alcoholic dies, a lot of times they leave their body because the energy that animated them is still an energy. It follows the laws of physics. And they are at a certain vibrational level. When they're at that level, they're going to seek other living people at the same vibrational level. That's why in the Crossing Over prayer book, there's a specific prayer to cross over an alcoholic. And it has elements of the prayer to give them healing when they hit the heaven world, when they reach the heaven world. And when you do that, you reduce the impact on living people. You could literally take the Crossing Over prayer. I mean, I have prayer cards that are available on ghosthelpers.com. Start putting that prayer card in bars. Ask the bartender, wouldn't it be easier if we, you didn't have ghosts in here? Bartenders may or may not believe that. But the point I'm making is that when you die, most people have no idea what to do. And if you're completely possessed in life and you leave your body, one of the most shocking things is looking around and seeing that, oh my gosh, who are you? They have no idea. They were not alone in their body. They had no idea how many other souls were with them, urging them to drink. And then when they died by whatever means, those ghosts who were with that living person, they all joined the band of merry alcoholics seeking the next person. This is why alcohol and drug abuse is so hard to stop. You can go to every rehab center and treatment center on the planet, and the recidivism rate, the failure rate is, I don't know what the statistic is, so I'm not going to make a number. I can't imagine. But my understanding is they stay in business because people come back over and over and over and over. You having a hard time kicking it because that series of voices in your head are continuing to tell you to drink. But possession can be even more than this. In the movie A Beautiful Mind that starred Russell Crowe, he had 3 ghosts with him. Had somebody helped him and crossed over those ghosts, how would his life have been different? It was I waited all the way to the end of the movie because I kept thinking, I wonder if he's possessed. He was. And there's another, how can we wrap our brains around some of this? Brian Weiss, who is a board certified psychiatrist, wrote a wonderful book called Many Lives, Many Masters. And he really upset the entire medical community because he talks about the legacy of mental illness, how far back it goes through past lives, and how he was able to help someone restore their soul. And this is his stories of how he worked on this. And he's written several books now because he's a man on a passionate mission to help humanity if they would but just listen. And that possession affects people on multiple levels. If you have a character disorder, I'm going to do a little bit of a definition moment here. You have varying types of mental illnesses, but the entry level starts with borderline personalities, narcissistic personalities, immature personalities, personalities who are addicted to adrenaline. That's another addiction, is adrenaline. And sometimes you see that with people with post-traumatic stress disorder. That's another element where you can have someone who's possessed. You see this especially in war zones. That person who lived through that car bombing in Iraq or Afghanistan, and everybody else in the car died, all those buddies could be with him. And you don't know whether he's grieving his own experience or he's grieving his own experience and all of theirs. It's a different type of possession. Sometimes the ghosts can be inside of your body. Sometimes the ghosts just move with you wherever you go. They're always there, right out of the corner of your eye. It makes the person feel like they are just crazy. And there's another form of possession. I had a guy in San Diego who his life just didn't work. I mean, no matter what he did, his life didn't work. And I started talking to his wife, and she's going on and on about his wife. And I'm getting this feeling like there's something else going on with this guy. I don't think he's alone in his body. So I said, try this, use the crossing over prayer and see what you find is happening with, if anything changes. So this man and his wife, he was so open, bless his heart. He couldn't hold down a job. He was chronically depressed. They said the crossing over prayer, and both of them saw, they're not psychic people. They never claimed to be psychic. Both of them saw a baby leave his body. It was the child his mother miscarried before he was born. And when that child left, it's as if this fog that he'd been in, and no matter what he did, he couldn't see around, just vanished. Within a week, he had a job. He became the husband she knew he could always be. It was remarkable. And it was just because I handed her a crossing over prayer card and said, try this. It's free. It's my gift to you. And she couldn't believe the difference. She couldn't believe it. And that was and I've seen this happen with twins who die in utero. They stay with the living twin. Children who have sometimes with an abortion or a miscarriage. Remember, whether it's an abortion or a miscarriage, you didn't kill the soul. You denied the soul access to that person as a parent. You made conscious decisions with an abortion. With a miscarriage, the body says, not ready to do this right now. Either way, you need to help the souls cross over. So the Crossing Over Prayer Book has prayers to help you with abortion, miscarriage, children who die at birth. So let me stop for a minute. They're just many, many different kinds of possession. I didn't want to just do alcohol, because I know these people who they feel like their life doesn't work and they feel like there's somebody with them. But if you tell somebody, oh my gosh, you might be crazy, but what if you're not crazy? What if there is a logical answer and an elegantly simple solution? There's my speech.
Thank you. Thank you. And I will include a link in the description regarding your website, which does offer the Crossing Over Prayer complimentary. So before I have you speak more into the fourth dimension, which again, we're oftentimes not taught about ghosts. Religion doesn't want to bring up this idea of ghosts. It's too woo-woo, even though I think the Vatican right now has a very busy exorcism department. But let me circle back to alcoholism for a moment, or any type of addiction. I think you've said in the past that it is a slow suicide. Would you say more on this just for a moment? And I'm slowing down the conversation just because I would like to explore, is it that the person's numbing out through the slow suicide? Is it that they're escaping into another reality? Because again, I'm next to Hollywood and drugs are huge in the industry. Is it that they're, shutting down parts of themselves that are too painful to process and walk through? Or is it that they're falling into entrapment?
There's a wonderful author by the name of Neil Donald Walsh who wrote a series of books regarding conversations with God. In one of I think it's the very first book, in that text, because I really want to make sure people know where something comes from, because there's some amazing authors out there. I couldn't recommend more. And Mr. Walsh is certainly one of them. In his book, he says, as he's talking to God, you say suicide is really bad. And isn't suicide really bad? And that conversation, God says, what do you think alcoholism and drug abuse are? It's just slow suicide. That's where that comment comes from. I want to make sure I attribute it to the correct author. It's not me, but I am repeating it because I thought it was so incredibly important to understand. When a person is alive, it doesn't matter what their age is. They have this zest for life. Their immune system is like, yeah, we're going to keep going. Life is wonderful. We have a bad day today, but tomorrow it's just going to be better. Or like me, I've been married 50 years to the man I love. Oh my gosh, I wake up every day grateful. I have an amazing family, fabulous kids. Couldn't be more grateful. But if you were chronically abused day after day after day as a child, no one came for you. No one rescued you. No one talked. No one was your advocate. There is a gritty rage, resentment that steps in. Some people turn that rage and they kill people. Some people turn that rage upon themselves because living is painful. This is not sitting in judgment of alcohol and drug users. This is seeking to use your term, unpack what's happening. Again, generational depression. When those people are abused, again, generations of abuse of some kind, or abandonment, that's another huge one, or derelict parents, or parents who murder their spouses in front of their children, creates huge trauma, and that trauma is never healed. And the person needs an escape from the pain. Let's just be honest. Isn't that what that is? When you're in an alcoholic neverland, you are seeking to escape from the pain. That's the truth. That's not right or wrong or good or bad. That's that person's reality. They've lived with it so long that they have been self-medicating for so long. They don't really sleep. They make it from day to day, and aren't they lucky? But there's a part of them, eventually, all they want to do is just sort of sleep and never wake up, and the pain is so great. They can also be possessed by lower realm intelligences. Let's just say it out loud. In the movie Ghost,
with Whoopi Goldberg and Patrick Swayze and Demi Moore.
Okay, in that movie, when each time those bad guys die, you notice it doesn't happen when Patrick Swayze dies. The light immediately comes for him. But when the bad guys die, these lower realm intelligences, they're about 3 feet tall with red eyes. That is exactly what they look like. They come for the soul. Sometimes, because I cross over a lot of suicides, they are harassing the living soul in addition to the ghosts. I've had many a suicide say, I saw these horrible things. I thought if I killed myself, I could escape them. Alcoholism, drug addiction, suicide are escape routes. Every one of them. Some of them with a bullet is quick. Some it's 20, 30 years of torture. It's all a plan of escape because the pain is so great. If you can cross any of those categories of souls over, and this is true for PTSD. Someone who has PTSD, it could be they were raped as a child, could be they were in a war zone, they're a police officer, an ER doc, or nurse, can be anyone who suffered greatly. There is this thread of depression. It's like this blackness that is inside of them. They don't know how to release it, and they feel that God has abandoned them. If you go to a church, it's hellfire and damnation. God couldn't love you. You're born in sin. You're going to die in sin. But what if you're born in karma and you got to work it out and you die, and there's this beautiful opportunity to cross over, but you're so guilty and so depressed, you really can't see the light when it comes for you. That's where the living can be enormously helpful. and it's not difficult. Well, in my opinion, it's not difficult, but a lot of people, it's terrifying. So I am correcting myself in that statement. I'm saying it is possible that you could be of great help to someone who has taken their life through whatever those variety of means are. It can be prescription drugs too, the opioid crisis, the fentanyl crisis, heroin, PCP, oxy, I don't know, all of those things. Those people they want the physical, spiritual, emotional pain to end. And there's no pill, potion, powder that's helping them. I think that is the true reality.
Yeah, it's interesting. Thank you for speaking into that. It's interesting because sometimes if there's an individual and they are addicted to alcohol, but they're a functional alcoholic, they can sometimes, and I don't know if it's a blessing or a curse, but they can have somebody carry them in this lifetime. So their pain gets prolonged. And especially if there's wealth, that wealth carries them and they don't have to look at it in terms of getting to that place of a breakdown before a breakthrough, hitting rock bottom, whatever the terminology is. And so I just wanted to echo back that this is a very real reality that a lot of times people don't want to talk about the pink elephant in the room. And yet there are people that are living in silent desperation. And again, people don't know how to speak into it or speak about it. And so it's left alone, which is further abandonment for that individual. And a part of it is they have to be ready. But another part of it is we walk by these individuals every day and they're suffering. And it's very, yeah, it's a subject that we can choose to have personal agency over to break the pattern, but it does take some internal initiative and some light, whether that's, as you had said, the living praying for the individuals, because prayer is powerful and cannot be discounted. So I wanted to ask you one question about, let's say, psychic children or even psychic adults. Let's say somebody is gifted with psychic ability. What then does drugs and alcohol do to that individual who has that skill set? Because I know you've said don't call it a gift, it's a skill set.
Drugs and alcohol, on the effect of drugs and alcohol on someone who has psychic ability can be catastrophic. Because if you can see ghosts or sense or hear them, and now you have dropped your shields and you are just a sitting duck for whatever is walking by in the fourth dimension, you can end up being bombarded. Alcohol will never be your friend. And if you're a parent with a psychic child, you're bringing all of these ghosts in and terrifying your child. If you're an adult and your spouse is psychic and you're bombarding that person, just because you don't believe it doesn't mean it isn't real for the other person. If you yourself are psychic, then you may end up losing that ability. Depends on how important it is to you. I mean, it's important to me. I safeguard it at all costs because that's how I do service for others. But if you don't care about it and you allow alcohol to rule your days, then you could end up seeing some things that are beyond terrifying, that are unbelievably terrifying. And you may not have someone to ask about it, nor might you have any idea what you can do about it. And shifting that is a big deal. I want to make sure that I don't leave everyone with the impression that if you just say a few prayers, it's all going to be over tomorrow. I don't want to do that. I do want to say that prayers are a beginning. And following along with your tract, saying the prayers is the beginning of opening a door and finding someone to work with who can help you heal the trauma of maybe not just this life, but multiple lives. Multiple lives. That was the whole point Brian Weiss made. You can't just send somebody home with a drug. If you're really a psychiatrist or psychotherapist, you have to delve into things you wouldn't have imagined could be affecting a person. and not addressing what happened in childhood or in the last life. I've known people who took their own life after life after life after life after life. Suicide had become a life pattern. This could be true for alcohol. It could be true for something like drugs as well. But in this life, this one particular individual got help before that person entered her life, because this person killed themselves every time this person died. And her life, her sole purpose was to live past the death of this person. I mean, it was one of the biggest ones of all. And in this life, that person died, and the feeling of wanting to leave because the depression hit her like a tidal wave, but she didn't give into it because she had worked on it before it happened. It just stumbled on that reality, because we did enough regressions. It's like, oh my gosh, this is a life pattern. He hasn't come into your life yet. This is the life you get ready. This goes back to when a student is ready, a teacher is going to be there. And I want to add something else to this. When a student is ready, then under spiritual law, that teacher has to show up somehow, some way. But there are people that you can't force them. And these are two really important concepts to have. You can't want something for another person that they don't want for themselves. You can't want something from another person that they have no capacity to give you. And when you think about those two concepts, it's such a powerful thing to consider. If you are married to someone who was so abused as a child, and you've taken them to all these different people and you've tried to get them help, and nothing changes, and you keep pushing and pushing and pushing to get that person to change, you want something from that person that they may not want for themselves, or they don't have the capacity to work through or to give even to themselves. And at that point, you have to entertain the possibility of forgiving them, and then decide how you are going to live the rest of your life, because it's not up to you to change the other person. You can only change yourself.
Yes. We spoke in our last podcast about this idea of jurisdiction. So if, for instance, if I wanted to pray for my own house, I could do that, as well as the public streets and the public lands, but I might not have the ability, let's say, other than sending another individual, an angel, to step beyond their boundaries and impose what I think is best for them, whether or not I'm a coach or an advisor or the attorney or a fellow family member, et cetera, that this is their own karmic journey that they have to take personal agency of, which is also very interesting, because a lot of the times in family council meetings, there's this idea of skill versus will. And one of my prior podcast guests, Linda Southwood, talked about this concept of skill versus will. Somebody can have amazing skills, but if they don't have the will and the interest, you can lead that horse to water. But if they don't want to drink, you can't push them. There has to be some internal motivator, desire, hunger to want to do good and grow, compared to staying within the darkness. So I'd like for you to speak into Psalm 23 a moment, as it relates to the context of the fourth dimension, if you would.
The 23rd Psalm exists in virtually all faiths. Isn't that fascinating? In one form or another. And it starts out, "Lo, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil." So let's kind of unpack that. When you die, and the seed atom of the soul is like this little ball of light, and it leaves the body, and you exit through the crown chakra, and you're taking with you all of the memories and the experiences and the karma that you accumulated in this life and all previous lives. And you leave the third dimension of time and space and gravity, and then you move into the fourth dimension of no time, no space, and no gravity. It's just dark. That's the part where it says, "I will fear no evil, for thou art with me." But the majority of the population, even if they go to church every day, they don't make the connection of asking God to help them at death. What a concept. They relate to God only in a mortal body. God is really there for you at death, but in that fourth dimension, you still have free will. That's a really important concept. At death, you will very frequently see this beautiful shaft of light. Again, very much like Ghost, that movie Ghost. And as you enter that light, it's just astounding and it's really bright, but it doesn't hurt your eyes. And then the psalm, it says, thy rod and thy staff comfort me. He restoreth my soul. Okay, that is the biggest concept in this. He restoreth my soul. I think it's surely goodness and mercy will follow me all the days. When you have trauma, life after life after life, it's like bits and pieces, like you're at a delicatessen and bits and pieces of your soul are shaved off until the conscience, the depth, the feeling, the dynamism of a mortal personality just becomes radically diminished. How do you ever get that back? If you reincarnate from the fourth dimension, which you can do, you don't get it back. And that's where serial killers come in and all the schizophrenic psychopaths and all of the theme and variation of mental illness all show up from that place. When the soul crosses over and the light hits your body, having watched this thousands of times, whether it's a physical injury or an emotional injury, it's like there's this healing element to the light of God. I don't care who you are. I don't care what you've done. And I've crossed over serial killers because they are not mine to judge. Do we really want them as ghosts haunting the living? Come on now. This light penetrates the soul and the energy that is the soul. And it's just like it's like when you pour a bottle of champagne, you see all these little bubbles and they're moving. It's like all these parts of you that were so desperate for this and so thirsty for this love and healing. It starts to percolate inside of you. And it's as if all those empty spaces are filled in with the most dynamic elements of love you can imagine. And as you move into the light, there are people there, animals that you have loved, pets that greet you and welcome you home. Mortal life is so temporary. When you go home and you see people you have loved, people you have missed dearly because they died perhaps too early, a child died,
Pets.
Pets. I mean, I have made requests that pets meet certain people because they gave that person's life meaning when nothing else did. Let us never judge the grief of someone who's lost a pet. And then you get to sit down with something called counselors of divine wisdom. This is so awesome. No one sitting in judgment of you. There's no, we are here to judge you. Doesn't happen. There's just kindness, only compassion. You can sit down and ask them any question. They go over the life just lived. They help you understand, why did you have this arduous life? What did you get right? What can you do differently another time? What challenges did you face and how did you handle them? And what can you learn? That's why your soul is restored. The other big reason to cross over is you don't come back in 3 to 5 years. This is huge. The normal reincarnation cycle is 152 years. That comes from a very unusual source. But what's happening is people are coming back in 3 to 5 years or 10 years. There's no resting for the soul. There's no restoration for the soul. They come back and they're just hit it again. Sometimes they come in so angry. I hear parents talk about, this kid was just born angry. All right. If that's the case, then you're doing the best you can. And I had a mom in South Dakota or North Dakota, I forget which state it was. Her 17-year-old son took his life. And I wrote several prayers regarding suicide for her and included them in the book. And she wanted to have her name in the book so that she could let people know that she stepped up and she crossed her son over. And she said the difference that she felt in her own grief, the joy she felt at knowing that he was embraced by light, that no one was punishing him or sitting in judgment or hurting him. He was embraced by love. It's amazing. And then she asked me to design a prayer for every day that she wants to send him her love. So I put that in the book for anyone. And she said, can you help me understand his suicide? That's a pretty tall order. I said, well, I can offer you some thoughts and then you can decide what works for you. And my thought would be that in my experience, people who take their life have done it life after life after life after life. They didn't cross over. So no one helped them. And in this lifetime, yes, he died. But you gave him the most remarkable gift. And this is a gift, the gift of the light by crossing them over. Yes, it's open to everyone, but not everyone goes. When you kind of push the issue and you bring in an angel to escort that soul into the heaven world, what you're doing is you're breaking the pattern of suicide, potentially. I don't tell futures, so I have to make sure I quantify that. And he said, if this is true, if I am right, by crossing him over, by sending him prayers from the love of a mother for her son, what you have done is strengthened him even in the heaven world, and you have given him hope for the next life. And that is its own miracle. There's a great master who said human beings create miracles for God to prove how great God is and how great the individual is. And in that moment, that woman had created a miracle for her son and herself. One of the things a great master said is that human beings create miracles for God to prove to themselves that they can create a miracle. And then there is this delight that God must surely feel. And then the human being, the soul, is elevated because they had this moment and experience of greatness. And this mom, instead of feeling horrible for the rest of her life, feels elevated because she crossed him over. She is helping his soul be restored. She is on a mission of love. And she said that it has made a massive difference in her life. And she shares this experience with other people. And this is also true for murder. People who are murdered, can't believe this, they're murdered life after life. And when you can break that cycle, and you're doing it through love and compassion and not being in judgment, and it's hard when that person's a family member or a neighbor or a boss or an abusive person. My belief is that each of us is doing the very best we can. And as long as we are abiding by the very best ethics that we can, then we keep ourselves in a good spiritual place. And if you are in a position to cross over someone who has died, then please buck up your courage and do it. You cannot know how much gratitude will come to you from the other side. Imagine thousands and thousands of people who were ghosts, but they're now souls in the heaven world, receiving healing, receiving understanding, receiving education. And when you cross them over, those are the thoughts that I hope will linger with you.
Yes, and I just want to make one clarification for the listener that when Tina is referring to crossing over a soul, it is from the third to the fourth dimension to the fifth dimension, which is the heaven world, the fourth dimension being the reference to Psalm 23, though I walk through the shadow of the valley
The
and
Valley of
so
the Shadow of Death, right?
yes, yes. Before I ask you to speak into remedies, do you believe it's easier for the fourth dimension intelligences to come down because they're always looking for hosts?
Absolutely. There's so much alcohol. It's in every television show, it's in every movie. It's even in teenage movies. I mean, it's being pushed and pushed and pushed, and pharmaceuticals are constantly being pushed on people. And without understanding every side effect of all of these things, how do we know what's really happening inside someone's body or what the influences are? It's a question that I don't think anyone can truly answer.
Interesting. I didn't know you were going to say yes so quickly. All right. So remedies,
Physical remedies or spiritual remedies?
spiritual remedies.
The very first, it's Occam's razor. The simplest solution is usually the best one at the beginning. Raise your frequency. And I wrote a book on karma and frequency, how to shift your frequency. And yes, obviously give up alcohol, give up drugs, cross all those people over who might be with you. Start to restore your auric field with using essential oils. As you're raising and raising and raising your frequency, you're using physical things to create a spiritual effect. I stayed with a woman in Arizona one time, and she must have had 1,000 little pictures and statues and icons of angels and Christ and God, and her house felt like $1 million. It was not my taste as far as decorating, but her house felt amazing. I'm not suggesting people do that, but look around you. What are you looking at? I went to visit this woman one time, and when you opened her front door, this massive painting of a woman in chains being tortured was what greeted her every time she went through her own front door. And I asked her, why would you have that? And she said, that's how I feel about life. And I said, well, do you feel that way about life because of that painting? Because I mean, it's your house, but geez, what surrounds you? Is it beauty? Are there happy colors? Are there happy people? Or is it depression? Depressing things. You can't change anyone else, but you can begin to change yourself. And my suggestion is slow, methodical changes. There are so many different things that you can do. Beautiful music that has a much higher frequency. Mozart, some of the New Age music, some of the music that comes from the Navajo or the Hopi Indians, a beautiful double flute music. It's just incredible. Or symphonies, or just the happiest music that when you sing out loud, you're giving all of the cells of your body energy. The cells take on what you believe to be true about yourself. If you believe you are a good person, then your cells believe that they are, working for a good person. But if you believe you're a bad person and deserve to be punished, there's some guilt there. Guilt will seek punishment every single time. So raise your frequency. Start to develop a personal, private relationship with God. This doesn't mean you go to church. People say, well, I can't go to church. This isn't about church. There's no religion in the afterlife. Let me assure you. There's just the beauty of the divine, the gentleness, the kindness. What a concept. If you don't know how to do that, I have prayers in here for the first time someone begins to communicate with God. And it feels awkward. And suppose you were abused by a church. It happened to me. And you feel like God has abandoned you. That's the greatest crime of spiritual abuse. It separates the soul from God, especially children. It's beyond hideously. The karma of that is, I can't even go address it. Once you separate someone from God, that's a really terrible thing. Build your own relationship. You don't need an intermediary. It's called the priesthood of all believers. Just begin. Decide today I'm going to do that. There's some great authors out there, including David Campbell. It's not David Campbell. He wrote Power versus Force. David Hawkins.
I thought you were
wrote a
going to say
wonderful book.
Joseph Campbell.
No, Joseph Campbell actually was a white magician who was the muse for George Lucas and all the Star Wars epics, which is an epic tale of good and evil. And Joseph Campbell helped him craft it. That's why the first couple movies were really great. Joseph Campbell died, and George Lucas lost his, my opinion was, kind of lost his rudder orders there.
So I know we're coming to a close. You don't like the word survivor. Why is that?
Because survivor to me is hanging on the edge, holding on. They're not really living, they're not enjoying life, and they wear it like a badge. I'm a survivor. And I just want to say to them, can I offer you a hand, and would you like to come come out of the edge and come in the window and sit down and thrive? Stop just surviving, because you're telling your subconscious you only have this much, but a thriving person has this much. And when you're surviving, you're giving your cells, cells of your body, this much energy. When you're thriving, you're infusing yourself with light. I would suggest people move past survivor into thriving personality. You might find it just does amazing things for your health.
Yes, yes. As we come to a close, when you were on the podcast last time, you stated that our karma is our legacy. Any other thoughts on this Design Your Legacy conversation?
We we create karma every day with every word we say. Not so we want to be afraid all the time. But when we go through our days, sometimes it's important to stop and say, is what I'm doing making a difference? How I'm doing this affecting other people? What can I do differently? No one leads a life of perfection. There's no learning in perfection. If you were perfect, newsflash, you wouldn't be in a mortal body, and you wouldn't be here. We are all here to learn. So accept your failings, but choose to move forward with a different sense that you're a good person. You can make a difference even in the subtlest, simplest ways, and start giving yourself, it's like giving yourself a sip of water when you're super thirsty. Give yourself the whole glass and start thriving.
Very nice. Before I read out the closing paragraph, thank you so much for being a guest once again, and the depth of the conversation and insight and content that you brought forward today. I know this was a tough subject, and thank you for tackling it with all of your life experiences to bring the expertise forward.
I am thrilled to be here. I am very, very grateful that you have offered me a platform to share this. If there is even one parent of a child who took their life, or one spouse whose spouse took their life, and they can find peace and comfort, especially at this time of the year, then I am super happy that could be done for that person. If maybe someone understood alcohol differently after today, wouldn't that be amazing for them? Anything we can do that furthers the goal of humanity to reach enlightenment. And it's a day-to-day job. So I can't do my job without people like you who open the door for the conversation. So I'm very grateful. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. So I will read out the closing paragraph now. In closing, I'm Angelina Carleton, the hostess of the Design Your Legacy podcast, as well as the founder of Two Legacy Planning, a boutique advisory firm based out of Beverly Hills, California, but international in those I coach. I hope to dive deep into subjects that can help a person define, develop, and execute their holistic legacy, and continue to scour the landscape for those who can be great resources to every dimension of your legacy. For many listeners and viewers, there can never be enough education and preparation in the mood or moat around your castle. Whether you find yourself with new wealth or generational wealth, may the content on this channel be an anchor in any storms ahead. We do our best to provide original content for your intellectual and emotional curiosity. Thank you for joining us today. And if you're tuning in on Apple or Spotify, please remember to rate and review. If you're watching us on YouTube, please remember to subscribe, share with your friends and family, etc. So thank you so much for joining us once again this week. And thank you to Tina Erwin for being a guest.